It has been a year since two Canadians were detained in China in what the media is calling diplomatic hostage taking. Now, this is referring to Michael Covers, a human rights NGO worker, and Michael Spavor, a DPRK focused consultant, who were detained by Chinese authorities on December 10 of last year. Now, this occurs at the same time in which U.S. prosecutors want Ming Wang, a the chief financial officer for Huawei, was arrested in Canada on charges of violating U.S. sanctions which don't apply to Canada and have no jurisdiction in Canada. So the Canadian government, of course, accused this of being a tit for tat response. Now, this has been very widely reported in the media. They're noting how she's on bail, but they are being detained for national security reasons, which they find are completely unjust. Now, the International Crisis Group, for which which is the NGO that Michael Kovrig works for, says that he's clearly a pawn in a larger geopolitical game. Now, Mr. Spavor's family did release a statement saying the following: Michael is an earnest, genuine, and impossibly fun person who we believe has been detained in error. He deserves better, and does fellow Canadian Michael Kovrig. We call on all sides to work towards a quick and positive resolution that results in their release. Now, the other man works for a DPRK-focused analyst group, and Kita Handa said the following: Michael Spavor's case has been a wake-up call. It indicates the risks foreigners operate under if they reside and do business in China. If the government decides that you're to be made an example of, there's nothing you can do to protect yourself. Now, the Canadian media, as well as the international media as well, have completely portrayed these two men as being completely innocent of absolutely anything, and that China just unjustly arrested them for, they say, a tit-for-tat response to the Huawei CFO being arrested. However, there's some very important facts that are being deliberately obscured by the Canadian media and the international media. Both of these men were operating under NGOs which did not have the permission of China to operate in China. In other words, their NGOs are illegally operating inside of China. But of course, that part is just being forgotten about. So they're already breaking the law, which makes them subject to arrest anyway. Now, what the media is also not telling you is that these two men were arrested around the border between the DPRK and China. This is a highly sensitive area which the Chinese government would prefer foreigners never visit. Foreigners are not allowed to be snooping around that area, which these NGOs are, one of them being, as I said, the International Crisis Group, a human rights organization that attacks the DPRK, snooping around the border between China and the DPRK. So that's already suspicious as it is, while they're illegally operating inside the country. But if you were to believe the media, then they would simply believe that this was all just innocent people being taken hostage for the Huawei executive, which they also forget to mention that her arrest has no jurisdiction in Canada for sanctions that are illegal that the United States have in place. Essentially, she's accusing of continuing to do business. Her Huawei is continuing to illegally do business in the United States in violation of those sanctions, and then she happens to be in Canada, so they decided to make us a tool of a U.S. Economic terrorism, let's call it what it is, and have her arrested, even though their laws have no jurisdiction here. Okay, so that's basically what they're not telling you. Now, if you're a foreigner, you're either very specifically in the tourist area between the DPRK and China, or you're not there at all. That's a very highly sensitive area for the Chinese government and the DPRK government. If you're outside of the tourist area and you're part of an NGO, and an NGO that's operating illegally, you're doing something to undermine one or both of the countries. So you're there for a hostile reason. And yes, you are going to be arrested. Now, imagine what would happen if the DPRK had an NGO illegally operating, or China for that matter, having an NGO illegally operating in the United States with the specific goal of undermining the United States. And they would be arrested and charged with being spies as well. And that's what these two men are being charged with, is espionage. Everybody knows that you don't stick your nose between the border between the two countries. Now, there's a multitude of reasons, aside from it being a very high security area, being one that's very sensitive given the current hostilities between the DPRK and the United States, but also because there's very probably illegal business going on between China and the DPRK, illegal trade that's trade that's not legal under international law, and that's probably what they were looking for. Now, I'm all in support of China violating unjust sanctions against the DPRK. Do all the trade with the DPRK frankly, to hell with what the international bodies and their unjust and often United States illegal sanctions are calling for. But these guys are being portrayed in the media as these innocent victims who didn't do anything, and they're just there being targeted by China as a form of punishment. And look how dangerous it is to work in China. If you do an NGO in China, beware that this is the kind of thing that they're going to do, as long as you leave out the fact that it was an illegal NGO and the fact that they were trespassing in a very sensitive area that's going to get you arrested, and that you wouldn't be there unless you were up to no good, so to speak. So it's interesting how the media is desperately trying to spin this by omitting, very, very important facts about the situation. But then again, isn't it very typical that we would see such kind of dishonesty from the mainstream media?
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.